So why do Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other? Oh boy, this is going to be a little bit of a spicy one now, isn't it? It is not exactly something that can be summed up very quickly, but for the past several decades, these two countries have effectively been at each other's throats, and the reason for that goes back for quite a while. This decades-old political feud is something that is only exacerbated by religious differences, as each one follows one of the main branches of Islam, with Iran being largely Shia Muslim, while Saudi Arabia sees itself as the leading Sunni power. And as a result of this religious schism, what you're going to see across the map is that depending on a country's religion, whether Sunni or Shia, they would appeal to either one of the two greater powers for support in regional conflicts, of which, as we know in the Middle East, there have been many conflicts over the past several decades. See, historically speaking, Saudi Arabia has been a monarchy, something that is home to the birthplace of Islam, and as a result of this, it sees itself as the leader of the Muslim world. However, this ended up being challenged back in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution broke out in Iran, in which a new type of state in the region was created, a revolutionary theocracy that had its own goal of spreading Islam around the world with its own touch upon it. And so it is that over the decades, these countries have fought each other for power and influence and prestige. But really, the question comes into it as, well, why? Well, in order to understand that, we're going to have to look back at the past 40 years of history because it gets messy. You see, my friends, prior to the Iranian Revolution, the two countries of Saudi Arabia and Iran were part of Richard Nixon's two-pillar policy in the Middle East. The monarchies, and in particular Iran, since the US-led coup in 1953, were allied to the US specifically in order to try and stop Soviet influence in the area. This alliance had acted as a kind of moderating influence upon Iran at the time, though this would very quickly go away once the Iranian Revolution would break out. Back in the year 1979, the Shah of Iran was toppled by his own people, and as a result had to flee the country. And in his place arrived Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and with him, a new sense of purpose. The idea of reviving Iran as a centerpiece of Islam, specifically Shia Islam, and a regional power which to influence politics through. Now guys, at the time that this occurred, this sent shockwaves throughout the entire Muslim world. There was no other Shia-dominant country of any kind of reasonable size that could compete with the other Sunni powers. Saudi Arabia, which had traditionally seen itself as the leader of the Muslim world, now had to face something that was more significant. Now, the reason why Saudi Arabia believes itself to be the leader of the Islamic world is that its kingdom controls the two holiest places in Islam itself, the cities of Mecca and Medina. But the importance of that doesn't just come from Islam, it is something that predates Islam, because before that, these regions were important trade hubs that everyone relied on the area, giving it a lot of prestige and power. In modern times, Saudi Arabia's wealth that it gets from its oil fields, combined with the influence from these cities, makes it an extremely influential state in the Middle East, one that is effectively able to lead the others, or so it thinks. I mean, you have to understand that millions of Muslims every single year visit Saudi Arabia specifically to go to these sites, which is something that is going to give it a massive amount of prestige as well as wealth that comes from tourism. All of these factors lead Saudi Arabia to believing that it is in fact the leader of the Muslim world, but then of course, as we said, the picture gets a little bit complicated because then Iran comes into it. You see, as a result of Iran being the only significant Shia Muslim nation, any kind of Shia religious group or organization or anything that is trying to be a thorn in the side of the Western powers or Saudi Arabia or pretty much any other Sunni group that could be seen as oppressing Shias, they're going to step in and try to supply them. The reason that they do this is because they've been crippled by decades of sanctions as well as Western interference in its affairs. And without the significant oil money that Saudi Arabia benefits from, Iran's foreign policy for the past several decades has been to develop proxies by equipping armed groups across the Middle East and by backing sympathetic regimes like that of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The thing with Iran is that it's more concerned with its own survival than pretty much anything else. Which, that is just it. Iran has effectively been fighting for its survival since its inception in 1979 after the revolution. The first significant event to occur in this case was the Iran-Iraq War, which began on the 22nd of September 1980 when Iraq, under the command of Saddam Hussein, would invade Iran. And this conflict would not end until the 20th of August 1988, when Iran would accept the UN-brokered ceasefire. Iraq at the time had wanted to replace Iran as the dominant Persian Gulf state, and it was worried, of course, that in 1979, when the Iranian Revolution was launched, that this would lead to Iraq's Shiite majority population to end up actually rebelling against the Ba'athist government. The war would also provide a means by which Saddam Hussein would be able to claim some territorial disputes and fill his coffers by seizing as much oil-rich provinces as he could. After all, what a better opportunity than now to crush a fledgling state that, after a revolution, really should not have the strength to resist him. Except the problem for him was that it did not work out for Iraq, like, at all. Saddam may have secured limited American and Saudi support during the war, but the advances that he made into the country were very quickly repelled, and by 1982, any of the territory that they had actually gained invading into Iran was reversed. And now Iran was on the offensive, and they would remain so for the remainder of the war all the way through until 1988. Over the course of this conflict, which was absolutely terrible, hundreds of thousands of people would end up dying and all kinds of different atrocities would occur. That is something that probably deserves a video in its own right, as it's a fascinating story that is like what would have happened if World War I took place 70 years after the fact. I can't spend too much time here, but needless to say, it was a brutal conflict. Apart from the Iran-Iraq war, Iran and Saudi Arabia have engaged in all kinds of different competition elsewhere. They've supported different opposing armed groups in the Lebanese Civil War, the Soviet-Afghan War, and other conflicts. Even after the Cold War between the US and the Soviets came to a standstill and then ultimately ended, the Cold War would effectively continue in the Middle East, except this time between the two regional powers of Saudi Arabia and Iran, with each one organizing themselves and others along sectarian lines of Sunni and Shia, and the lines only get more blurred and complicated from there. The greatest example of this competition is more than likely of all places in Yemen. Yemen is a small country that is located on the Arabian Peninsula, and it's become something of a sight of terrible civilian suffering amidst a civil war that just does not seem to want to end. Most of the analysts that are looking at this conflict now pretty much say that it has become a proxy conflict, something that is fought between Iranian-backed Houthi rebels and a multinational coalition that is being led by Saudi Arabia. And as for why Saudi Arabia would be concerned with what is going on in Yemen in the first place, well, there's a multitude of reasons. The Bab el-Mandab Strait off the coast of Yemen is a very critical oil shipping lane that links the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The reason why the Saudis want to have control of this particular area, or at least a government that is non-hostile to them, is because if a hostile government gained control of this area, then the millions of barrels of oil that are shipped through the region would be in danger. To the Saudis, that is simply not something that they're going to be able to allow, and simultaneously, the Yemen war would also help with the political ambitions of this Saudi defense minister who is now the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who would use this conflict in order to try and gain some legitimacy for his position and show his power on the world stage. Lastly, if the Saudis had control over Yemen, then this means that they would be able to construct an oil pipeline from the southern border through Yemen's eastern province into the Indian Ocean. If they did so, then this means that the pipeline would effectively bypass the ocean that the Iranians could potentially harm things from. Which I guess is a completely understandable position, because over the course of the war in Yemen, multiple attacks have been made upon Saudi Arabia that have severely affected oil production. And in the case of a state like Saudi Arabia, where the majority of its economy is derived from oil, any harm to the oil industry whatsoever is felt on a magnitude that is really incomparable to any other kind of product. These cross-border attacks are oftentimes the reason why things are cited as the Saudi Arabians have to continue to fight in Yemen. But whether or not that's actually true or not, it gets a little bit complicated. You see, technically speaking, the reason why these rebel groups keep on attacking Saudi Arabia is because Saudi Arabia is already interfering with things in Yemen. Theoretically, if Saudi Arabia stopped attacking the rebel groups within it, then they themselves would have no reason to simultaneously attack Saudi Arabia. Whether or not that's actually true and how that would play out is really anyone's guess, but no one seems to really want to lay down their cards first and show their hand. Instead, Saudi Arabia justifies its conflict, saying that the reason why it's fighting there is because these rebel groups are being backed by Iran, specifically in order to destabilize Saudi Arabia. And in regards to Iran, while it is true that Iran has provided weapons and training to the Houthi rebels every year, Iran simultaneously spends significantly less than the hundreds of billions of dollars that Saudi Arabia has poured into this conflict already. A significant portion of the Houthi weaponry that has been seized was found to have already come from Yemeni stockpiles, or from also simultaneously defeating Saudi-backed forces. The thing about Iran is that Iran is more than willing to be a pain in the side of the Saudis. Anything that they could do to make the Saudis spend a little bit more money, shed a little bit more blood, put in a little bit more effort that makes their lives hell, they are willing to do so. That is why these decades of proxy conflicts have continued, but they are more than likely to continue for the decades to come, because neither side is ready to pull that final trigger to finish things with the other. The short of it is that in the end, although the reason why these two powers hate each other may seem to be religious at first, which, don't Don't get me wrong, that certainly is a factor. It is more of a factor of religion wrapped up in regional politics, wrapped up in cultural and economic politics, that is simultaneously being played upon the world stage with different powers being involved into the mix. No one exactly ever said that covering things in the Middle East was easy, but I really hope that today's video explaining the conflict and a little bit of the history behind it is something that helped you understand why things are the way they are today. It is not a clean or easy story. And simultaneously, when it comes to all these rival videos, you always have to remember that I have to be a little bit more careful with the words that I'm using because of the way that YouTube can be when it comes to demonetization. So everyone, I would really appreciate if you liked, commented, and subscribed to anything that you can to help this video in the algorithm. Really, who knows what exactly is going to happen with it, but I really do appreciate all of you for watching. Thank you very much for watching, and let me know in the comments below what it is that we should cover next. Let me know what other rivals or other things that you'd like to see, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you.